Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Army of Women Research 101 webinar. My name is Leah Wilcox Eshraghi. I'm the Army of Women Research Project Manager at the Dr. Susan Love Research Foundation, and I'm really excited about today's webinar. We have with us today Dr. Heather Ochs-Balcom from University of Buffalo. Welcome, Dr. Balcom, Ochs-Balcom.
Thank you very much.
So just to give a brief introduction, Dr. Ochs-Balcom is a genetic epidemiologist with a research focus on genetics of complex traits, primarily obesity and breast cancer. She joined the Department of Social and Preventive Medicine in 2007 after completing a postdoctoral fellowship at Case Western Reserve University in the Division of Genetic and Molecular Epidemiology under Dr. Robert Elston. She was appointed as an assistant professor in 2009. And Dr. Ochs-Balcom is currently working on a study of genetic factors for breast cancer in African American families, participating as an investigator in the Women's Health Initiative SHARE project, and studying the association of both inherited and tumor genetic copy number variation and breast cancer risk. She is broadly interested in applying the most up-to-date tools that allow for investigation of how genetics contributes to disease risk. And today she will be talking to us about her Jewels in Our Genes study and how she used the Army of Women for recruitment for that study, and some of the success and some of the lessons she learned. And we'd like to also say happy National Cancer Research Month. May is National Cancer Research Month. And I think an important thing we'd like to point out today is that the Army of Women program definitely celebrates National Cancer Research Month in May, but we celebrate it all throughout the year by helping researchers throughout the U.S. recruit for their studies. So today I'm going to get started with a brief overview of the Army of Women. I'm going to talk about some of the basics of the Army of Women, what it is, who it is, and some of our success stories. I'll also go over some slides. If you're interested in submitting an application, I will go over slides on how to do that and provide some screenshots for that. And then Dr. Ochs-Balcom will go in and talk about her study. And also to let you know that as we're going through these slides, the webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our website shortly, and so you can go back and reference the slides as necessary. And also, please, if you have any questions, you can type them in, and I'll be able to see them on my screen, and we'll go through those questions at the end. So again, welcome. And just to get started, get my mouse out of the way of everybody. Oops. Let's see. All righty. Can everybody still see my screen? Heather, can you still see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. All righty. Okay. All right. The mission of the Dr. Susan Love Research Foundation is working to eradicate breast cancer and improve the quality of women's health through innovative research, education. And I think what really sets us apart from other research organizations is we're trying to identify the barriers to research, to explore new approaches, and create new solutions. And one of those new solutions is definitely the Army of Women program. So what is the Army of Women? The Dr. Susan Love Research Foundation's Love Avon Army of Women program is a groundbreaking online initiative we launched in October 2008 with the goal of recruiting 1 million women to participate in breast cancer research. We connect a variety of breast cancer researchers with women who are willing to participate in a multitude of studies, especially those looking into the causes of breast cancer and how to prevent it. And I think one of the very important factors of the Army of Women for researchers to know is that all women and men over the age of 18 are encouraged to sign up, whether affected by breast cancer or not. So we have, and you'll see in later slides, a majority of the Army of Women members are actually women without a history of breast cancer. So what are the goals of the Army of Women? We want to encourage all women to take the next step in breast cancer advocacy and actually participate in the research studies. We want to get the women invested in the concept of research to find the answers. And again, very importantly, we want to forge a partnership between the women and the researchers to end breast cancer. So we're a little bit different in terms of our organization. We are recruiting these women for researchers so that they can participate in the study, but we want the women to be involved and have that experience of participating in research. So at the end of research studies, when the researcher has preliminary results available, we'll do an online webinar like this one so that women who participated in the study can hear about the results and, close that loop with the partnership. A few more goals of the Army of Women: increase the amount of research focused on the cause and prevention of breast cancer. And again, we really want to accelerate the research process by providing researchers access to this pool of healthy volunteers and women with a history of breast cancer. So how does it work? If you wanted to join the Army of Women, you would sign up online to receive email announcements of available studies. We keep it very simple. We ask for some very basic contact and demographic information. And then once a woman signs up or a man signs up, they start receiving our call to action emails that we send out to the entire database when a study becomes available. And then the members RSVP if they're interested, and they go through an online screening. And this point is also very important because we don't send our emails to segments of our database. We send it to everyone, regardless of their location, regardless of their medical history, because we really want these studies to get out virally to our women in the Army of Women and then people outside the Army of Women as well. And so from there, we manage the subject list, and then we pass on the information to the research teams, and then the research teams contact the women to do the consent and enrollment process. So we aren't matching women to studies. It's not a clinical trial matching program or a tissue bank. These women are selecting themselves if they want to participate in the study. So how does it work for researchers? There's also a registration page that I'll show you later for researchers. So a scientist would register on our website, and then they would have access to submit an application to request recruitment via the Army of Women. And we currently have a membership base of more than 372,000 women. So we're able to help researchers in multiple ways. If you don't have funding for your study and you're applying for a grant, you can request a letter of support from us if you'd like to include the Army of Women as a recruitment resource in your application. The application would be reviewed by the Dr. Susan Love Research Foundation staff. And if we think the study is an appropriate study for the Army of Women, then we issue a letter of support that you would include in your grant submission package. And we include the pricing information as well. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So if you have a study and it's funded and you're ready to go, then we have two different review processes. And I'll just open these up real quick because there's just one minor difference between the two. If you have non-peer-reviewed funding or peer-reviewed funding, all of the studies are reviewed for scientific merit and appropriateness by our external scientific advisory committee. If you have peer-reviewed funding, we don't want to redo the peer review process, so we're going to have one scientist and one advocate review it. If you have non-peer-reviewed funding, we do a little bit more of a review, and we have two scientists and one advocate review it. And then any studies that are approved to recruit via the Army of Women would then need additional IRB approval for online recruitment, and the email would also, that we draft to send out to our also need to be reviewed as well. A little bit more detail about the Army of Women and our processes. The Dr. Susan Love Research Foundation Scientific Advisory Committee consists of 51 members, and those include researchers, clinicians, and trained breast cancer advocates. All studies, as I said, have to have IRB approval, including approval for online recruitment, before we launch a study to the Army of Women membership. Over 90% of the studies are peer-reviewed funded studies. And we have a cost recovery model of $1,500. That's a one-time flat fee. And we recruit for you until you've reached your accrual goal or until you're ready to stop recruiting. So if approved, the average time to launch a study after an application is submitted on our website is approximately 90 days. Now this time really depends on many factors. One, we have a legal agreement, our memorandum of understanding. So depending on how long it takes for that to get reviewed and approved, that can affect the launch time because that needs to be signed off before we launch the study. And then the IRB approval of the e-blast, that timing can also affect how quickly we can launch a study. So those are a couple of the different factors. In terms of the percent of approved applications, approximately 67% have been approved so far. And in terms of general reasons for us to deny a study to recruit via the Army of Women, one is if an application is not focused on breast cancer. So at this time, the Army of Women is focused on breast cancer studies. We have done a couple ovarian cancer studies that we were able to tie into breast cancer. So if you have breast cancer studies, definitely come to us. We are not currently helping recruit for cohort studies at this time. For longitudinal cohort studies, we don't want to confuse our members. We have not been helping recruit for clinical drug trials because we don't have the access to the women who are at the time trying to decide between treatment options. And then also, if the study is not appropriate for the Army of Women membership due to the eligibility criteria, for example, if they're looking for women prior to the start of breast cancer treatment, again, we have a hard time getting women in that stage. So moving on, who are the Army of Women members? We have more than 372,000 women recruited and a few good men. As I mentioned before, 70% have never had breast cancer. 30% of the members are survivors or going through active treatment. And very interestingly, 67% have no first-degree family history, which we were surprised by. We thought that people joining the Army of Women would have more close ties to breast cancer, but as you'll see, everyone out there is interested in helping with this cause. 27% have one first-degree relative who had breast cancer, and 5% have more than one first-degree relative who had breast cancer. And on a side note, if any of the researchers out there are interested in additional demographic information, you can feel free to email me. My contact information is at the end, and I can provide additional information. But again, we do ask just for some basic contact and demographic information. So if you're looking for more detailed information in terms of medical history or things like that, you would collect that from the women once they were participating in your study. So who are the Army of Women in terms of demographics? You'll see we have, a large proportion of Caucasian women, but we do have high numbers of Hispanic and Latina women, African American women, both of those over 12,000 members. And we're moving up with additional Asian women as well. And the Army of Women team at the foundation is working hard to increase the diversity of the Army of Women, and we welcome any suggestions or ideas for that. Our age range, you're looking at 21% are 18 to 39 years old, 47% are 40 to 59, and 32% are over 60. So you'll see that the majority of our members are over the age of 40. So just to get into a little bit of information about some of the success stories, since the Army of Women launched in 2008, we've launched 72 studies sent out to the Army of Women members. 54 of those studies have closed. 6 studies increased recruitment due to success. So they were doing so well getting women into the study that they went to their IRB and they got permission to increase their N, and we were able to get the additional women for those studies. 4 studies were recruiting on an international level. 28 studies were recruiting women on a national level, and 42 studies were regional. But many of those studies that were regional had multiple sites where women could participate. On average, we're launching 2 new studies every month, and then more than 84,400 members have registered to enroll in studies since the Army of Women launched, which is really exciting. So I'm going to go through a few examples of some of the studies that we've helped recruit for. One of these studies is an Avon Foundation funded study, the Shift Work and Breast Cancer Risk Study at Virginia Tech. The PI is studying breast tissue samples from healthy women. She's looking at day shift workers and night shift or rotating night shift workers, and she wants to better understand how the wake-sleep cycle disruptions increase breast cancer risk. The Army of Women e-blast went out, and we were able to recruit our 25 day shift workers pretty quickly, but the night shift workers were a lot more difficult to enroll. So as we were going through the process, we talked to the PI, and she decided to expand her eligibility criteria. And when we sent out the new email with the eligibility criteria, 80 more night shift workers signed up to be screened for the study. And this study is a special one because we're partnering with the Komen Tissue Bank at Indiana University to collect the core biopsies for the PI. So the PI at Virginia Tech didn't have the ability to collect the samples on her own, so she came to us for help. So we contacted the Komen Tissue Bank and developed a partnership where we recruit the women for the study, and we ask them to attend the Komen Tissue Bank collection to donate their core breast biopsies. And it's been a really great partnership and has worked out really well. So if you're a researcher and you're wanting to collect samples but you don't have the ability to do it on your own, definitely contact us, and there may be a way that we could help you with that. Another study that we helped recruit for was another Avon Foundation funded study called the BEAM study at Northwestern University and Johns Hopkins. This study was looking for 400 healthy women. They needed to collect NAF, core biopsy, and blood. And this is one of those studies where we were able to recruit so many women that they increased their recruitment goal by 100, due in large part to our support and participation. So at the end, there were 846 RSVPs for the study, and 8% of those women were ethnic minorities, which the research team was really pleased with. And you'll see the TI feedback that Army of Women was significantly more effective compared to their other recruitment resources. Sorry about that. Another research study that we help recruit for is Dr. Ochs-Balcom study, the Jewels in Our Genes study. It's a Komen-funded study. And Heather is investigating whether there are undiscovered inherited genetic mutations unique to African Americans that may predict early breast cancer risk. So we started the recruitment in October 2010. The goal was 336 volunteers, looking for 125 relative pairs and then unaffected sisters. The recruitment slowed down after a while, so again, Heather decided to expand the eligibility criteria. We sent a new call to action email to the Army of Women members in February of 2012. 62 more women signed up for the study, and 71% of those new signups came within 48 hours of sending out that email. So this is a really quick return on investment. We closed the study to enrollment on June 15th, 2012, and you'll see Heather present later that 34% of her study sample came from the Army of Women. So in terms of our capabilities and what we do best, if you're looking for patient-reported health and clinical data, definitely can help with that. If you need blood, urine, or saliva, it can be collected at your institution. What also works really well is if you have a kit that you can mail the Army of Women members and you're able to recruit on a national level, or as I mentioned, we may be able to facilitate the collection through one of our partners. We've also helped researchers collect ductal fluid, tissue, and in terms of tissue, we can help facilitate collection of fresh normal breast tissue samples, like the fresh core biopsy samples that Komen Tissue Bank is collecting. But at this time, we cannot facilitate the collection of fresh tumor biopsy samples. We don't have a mechanism in place to find women before they're going in for a biopsy to have additional tissue samples collected. We do really well with studies that are recruiting on a national level, regional studies in major metropolitan areas, and then those looking for specific minority groups such as lesbians, Latinas, or metastatic breast cancer patients. Some of the feedback we've gotten from our researchers, 100% would recommend the Army of Women as a recruitment source and would use the Army of Women again. 86% said it was a significantly more effective recruitment method than anything previously used. And then we asked them what were the main strengths of the Army of Women. And I'll read the shorter one because I think it's a really great quote, is that the online recruitment reaches a large amount of people in a very short amount of time. Volunteers clearly trust Army of Women and are eager to participate in research. And I think that's something we're very proud of here at the Foundation. We have a new cohort study that we recently launched, and I'm going to skip over these two slides, but we can look at them on the website, and if you have any additional questions, please let me know. So let me go into the nitty-gritty of how this works if you're interested in recruiting via the Army of Women. So if you would like to register, if you haven't already registered as an Army of Women researcher, you can do so on our website, and here's the link here. So you're going to go to our For Researchers page, and you're going to fill out the researcher registration form. And for this, we also just ask for some very basic contact and demographic information for you to sign up. So once you create an account, you're then able to submit an application. So if you're interested in getting a letter of support from the Army of Women to include in your application for funding, you can enter the requested information in the application. We ask for some basic contact information. We need to know the number of women or men needed, the inclusion-exclusion criteria, and the project needs from the Army of Women member. Are you looking for data, specimens, what type of specimens, etc.? You would also upload the requested documents, and please note that the 2 different files that are accepted. And we ask for your NIH biosketch and a scientific abstract as well. And here is the page for you to sign into your researcher account. There's the login page. You enter your username and password. You can always email us if you've forgotten your username or password. We're happy to help with that. And then here's what it looks like when you log into your account and you're ready to submit your research proposal. There is the very first page where you're entering your project title, and then we're going to ask if you currently have funding for your research project. So if you're submitting an application for a letter of support, you're going to click on No and proceed on to the next step. And this is what the page looks like. You're going to enter in your basic information. You're going to enter in your pending funding source, any collaborators, the specifics about the study, what you're looking for. Upload your files here, and then you go ahead and request a letter of support from the Army of Women. And that application is submitted into our database. We review the application at the Dr. Susan Love Research Foundation to determine if the study is an appropriate fit for the Army of Women. If we approve it, then you will receive a letter of support and a cost sheet for budgeting purposes to put into your application. If you do receive funding for your study, then you will come back to us and complete the remainder of the application, which is the full study application that I'll talk about right now. So if you have a funded IRB-approved study, then you're going to submit a full application to recruit via the Army of Women. You're going to enter in your requested information on our page, again, some just simple information about your study. Upload the requested documents, and for the full Army of Women application, we're looking for your NIH biosketch or CV, the scientific abstract, the budget award letter, complete grant application or protocol, and then the IRB approval document. And again, they're the 2 file types that are acceptable on our website. So again, just a few screenshots that show how you're able to go ahead and submit. So you do have funding for your research project. You're going to go through and complete the basic information, submit your NIH biosketch and scientific abstract, go on to the next page, and you're going to enter some additional information. If your study is not peer-reviewed funded and you have funding from an additional source or you have funding from internal money at your institution, if you don't have a budget award letter, feel free to upload a document that just states where your funding is coming from so that we know how it's being funded. Again, for the complete grant application, if you didn't have to submit a grant for this funding, you can definitely submit a study protocol, and we'll take a look at that there in lieu of the complete grant application. If you already have IRB approval, definitely upload that. If you don't have IRB approval yet for the study, go ahead and upload it anyway, and we can talk to you about the specifics. So here you're going to give us your contact information for contracts and grants officer. You're going to review your application and submit it. And then once it's in our system, again, the Army of Women team at the Foundation will review it. If we think the study is a good fit, then we will submit it to our Scientific Advisory Committee for review. Again, peer-reviewed funded study goes to 1 scientist, clinician, and 1 advocate. And the non-peer-reviewed funded studies get reviewed by 2 scientists or clinicians and 1 advocate. If the study is approved, this is a brief outline of our process. So the email blast or the e-blast that will be sent to the Army of Women database is drafted for IRB approval. We draft that first here at the Foundation and send that to you for review. In the e-blast, we talk about what the study is about, what is involved, who is conducting the study, where the study is being conducted, and who can participate. In other parts of the process, as I said before, we have our memorandum of understanding that needs to be executed before the study can be sent out to the Army of Women, and we send it the invoice for the $1,500 flat fee. After the IRB approval for the e-blast is received and the memorandum of understanding is fully executed and payment is received or in process, we send the e-blast to the full Army of Women database. Women self-select if they want to participate. And the interested women undergo a secondary online screening where we basically ask them to confirm that they meet the main eligibility criteria for the study. The approved names with their contact information is then sent to the research team, and the research team proceeds with additional screening and the consent and enrollment process. So finally, I am giving you my contact information. Please feel free to email me or call me with any questions. I'm happy to help answer questions about the Army of Women in general, or if you're having trouble with the application process, I'm happy to help with that as well. So I'll take a look and see if there are any questions right now. We don't have any questions right now, so I'm going to go ahead and change the presenter over to Heather so that she can talk about her study in recruiting via the Army of Women. Nice picture.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Here we go. Here we go. My crazy kids. Okay. Okay. Can everybody see that?
Perfect. I can see it just fine.
Okay. Well, thank you, Leah. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about our recruitment successes. So if you called me 2 years ago, it would have been more of a depressing recruitment story, but now things have really turned around for us, and we've actually wrapped up recruitment and are getting ready to do some large-scale genetic analyses. So let me first just give you some background. So you know, we've seen a lot of BRCA in the news just in the past couple weeks, hearing about Angelina. Well, what I'm trying to do is hold on here. What's happened? Sorry. Okay. So so we're familiar with BRCA1, but BRCA1, this is and within that gene there are high-risk genetic variants that if you inherit these, you have a very strong, much higher risk of breast cancer than women in the general population. So these are passed down within families. So these genes were identified based on studies that were done in the early 90s in white women. So in these studies started with 23 extended families who volunteered and about 329 women. So what these original linkage studies did is just hone people into certain regions of chromosomes, and then from that, more studies are done to try to see, okay, what's happening in that region of the chromosome. And then, you know, a few years later, they got down to the specific BRCA1, BRCA2. So that approach is very, very powerful for finding genes that have these large effects. Interesting, too, that 96% of BRCA mutation carriers are white. Okay, so the question here is, why have we not explored inherited genetic risk factors for breast cancer in women of color? So I'm interested in African Americans. I'll tell you about a little bit more about the story in just a second of exactly how I got involved. But first, let me talk about the disparity in breast cancer by race. So what we know is that compared to white women in the U.S., African American women have a higher incidence for premenopausal breast cancer, higher rates of triple-negative breast cancer. And this is similar, so a lot of women who are carrying BRCA, or these high-risk alleles, have a triple-negative tumor. But here we see that fewer black women appear to be carrying these BRCA mutations, yet they do have these more aggressive tumors. Overall, in black women, once they're diagnosed, they have poorer survival or higher breast cancer mortality rates compared to white women. So this is a really great area to be in right now. Okay, so here's how it all started. So I was at a meeting, and I met Dr. Deborah Irwin, who is, she's head of the Office of Cancer Health Disparities at Roswell Park. And she had mentioned that she had just met Veronica, who's right here in the middle of the picture, who was diagnosed at 39, and her mother's also a breast cancer survivor, and her Aunt Evelyn, who's on the left. So her mother and aunt were diagnosed when they were postmenopausal, and Veronica was diagnosed much younger. So she underwent genetic testing as recommended by her doctor. She was not found to carry these BRCA mutations. So this came out of her mouth. Veronica's not a scientist. She says, you know, why? What is the gene that's affecting my family? She said, obviously genetic. Look at my family. You guys just haven't found it yet. So since we started the study, we learned more. So there are other people in her family who also have breast cancer. There are 7 women in her family. So she's got cousins. She has I think she has 3 cousins now that have breast cancer. One of them has passed away. So what we've done is used her family, and they've agreed to serve as our model family, and because they really instigated this. Once I heard about Veronica's story, I came right back to my desk here, did a PubMed search, because I was curious if any of those families that have been studied to look for genes included African Americans. And you can imagine what I found. No African American families were included. So I got really excited. Debbie Irwin and I wrote the grant to Komen, and it was funded on the first try. So we thought, well, we were so excited, just jazzed up to do it because no one else had done it before. So here are our broad study goals. The first one was, and this I've learned a lot through this piece, so we wanted to identify factors related to participating in a study like this. So we hosted a series of focus groups. The women, just how to phrase things. The women helped me design a logo. They came up with the jewels in our genes, the name of the study, how we would do it, what kind of data we would collect, how we would ask for that data, how much time, how long the questionnaire should be, saliva versus blood, those kind of things. So they became advisors or consultants, whatever you want to call them, as we designed the study. So then after that, we set up the protocol, and basically, well, let me say about these other two goals before I tell you what happened, is we want to conduct this family-based genetic study. So number 2, we want to examine the concordance of ER, PR, and HER2 status in the families. So no one's ever really looked at this to say if you have a family with breast cancer, how similar are their tumors with respect to these markers. So that's something that we're starting to work on right now. What we're also doing is looking at the correlation of proportion of African ancestry, which we're estimating for every woman, and to see how is that related to the proportion of ER, PR, and HER2 status in those tumors. The third thing we're going to do, and this is the large-scale genetic analyses I mentioned, what we're going to do is search through the entire genome and try to find signals in it. So parts of the genome that are shared between affected relatives, and who the unaffected sisters who Leah mentioned, we're recruiting them too, so regions that aren't shared between the discordant sisters. So that's, in a nutshell, that's what this approach is that we're taking. And hopefully that will give us some nice signals throughout the genome that we can then study further, just like they did with BRCA1. So the goal here was to recruit at least 125 relative pairs or families, where within each family we wanted to have at least 2 women with breast cancer. And then we also wanted to add in these older unaffected sisters. So older because, with the assumption of, the older they are, and if they haven't had breast cancer, then maybe they don't carry the mutations we're looking for, so it's appropriate to use the models that we're going to run. So we wanted to get at least 250 cases and about 86 unaffected sisters. So our goal, like Leah said, was about 336 African American women. So the relative types, siblings are the most ideal to study, but we also can study half-sibs, mother-daughter pairs, aunt and niece pairs, grandmother-granddaughter, and first cousin. So we can't go any further than that. And if some portion of these women who have had BRCA testing, and if they were tested and were positive, then we did not include them in the study, because that's clearly what's driving their breast cancer, and we don't want to find those genes. We want to find new ones. Okay, so we have a questionnaire where we ask them to tell us about their reproductive history, where they had their mammograms, when, which procedures they've had done, when and where, so we can track down their medical records. We asked about history of breast and other cancers within each woman, but as well as their family. And using that information, we draw out a family pedigree. That gives just a nice visual way to get to know the families that are included in the study. And then we also, we're using saliva as our source of DNA. But I'm very interested to talk to Leah about this common tissue bank and how you can help if I want to, because I'm planning for another study now, and blood would of course be ideal. The women probably won't like it, of course, and they told me they don't want to be poked with a needle, but we'll talk. Leah, I'll bother you about that later.
Sounds good.
So all participation is handled through the mail. So we're a nationwide study. So when we identify a woman and her relative who are both willing to participate, we send out the packets, ask them to return as soon as possible. We estimate that it takes about 45 minutes to spit into our little tube and fill out the questionnaires, sign the consent form, all that. And we paid the women $50 for their participation. Okay, so when we originally designed the study, we had this partnership with a National Witness Project, which is an outreach and screening program for breast and cervical cancer. So they have 25 sites throughout the country where they train women at each site, and these are advocates, breast cancer survivors, who are trained with regard to cancer screening and how important that is. They go into their community, they know their communities. So we did an informal survey with the Witness Project before I wrote the grant to see, okay, how many families like this are in your network that we can potentially use as the base of our recruitment. So I think we came up with about 107 families through all these sites. So we were so excited. We said, well, this is a piece of cake. We have these women in our network. We have a great way to reach them. So this was the only recruitment source we really had planned when we wrote the grant. So we were writing a paper now to sort of document what happened and why we needed to diversify and try these new methods. What we think is happening is that these women were more uncomfortable with promoting research. And I'm thinking because the benefits are just less tangible and immediate, and without a really nice engagement with them, a more personal engagement with those women and training in the benefits of research and the process of research, we couldn't reach our goals. We kind of hit a wall. So then what I did, the first thing I did, was then get in touch with the Avon Army of Women. And you'll see later how that compared to what or other ways. So another method we used was, so I have colleagues who have done studies already in breast cancer case control studies. So I contacted them and said, of your African American women, would you be willing to do a mailing to these women to see if they're interested in participating? So not have me contact them directly, but because that's not the way that their study was set up. And then they would pass on the names to me if they're interested, and then I would recruit them. So we did that too. So we had a few barriers there too, because some of the studies were old, and of course you lose women over time. But we had some success there too. And those women are motivated because clearly they've participated in a study before, which probably required much more of them than what I am asking of them. We also kind of hit the ground running. I sent some of my study teams to infiltrate the Sisters Network, go to some of their events. They have a big conference we went to, their race they hold every year, just to try to meet people and talk to people. We were set up as vendors. We went to, there's a Komen races here locally at our affiliate. And then there's a huge race where a lot of African American women go to in Little Rock, Arkansas. So we have a tie to Arkansas. That's where Dr. Irwin grew up and is from. So we went there during that race and got a lot of names of potential women. So you can see we tried a lot of these different ways, and it took a lot more time than we planned, a lot more money and labor, phone calls, travel. You name it. It took, I can't even put a number on it, but it was very difficult because each one of these required new IRB approvals because it's, you had a new letter for each study. It was pretty agonizing, but we've learned a whole lot as we're moving into another study. So our recruitment period started right in early 2010, and went through 2012. We just closed in December. So our final numbers, and this is a little eerie, we ended up with 342 African American women from 127 families. So we are right around, I mean actually just above where we hope to be. So we've got almost 250 breast cancer cases, 94 of them are unaffected sisters. Okay, so here is the Army of Women response. We did 3 e-blasts. So we had 272 women in total. So of those, 116 completed the study. So that was, just above 40%. We had a certain portion, 48 of them, who were not eligible. So in this non-eligibility comes mostly from women who didn't have a living family member who had breast cancer. Most of these women, their sister had died. So I don't know, Leah, maybe next time we'll have to take a closer look at that. Somehow that was missed. But so refusals, there were 36 women who refused, either themselves or their family members refused, because remember, I need both of those women to participate. And then we had a large portion who we were unable to contact. So I remember when we did the first e-blast, we contacted them primarily by phone number. But then I started sending emails to some of the women who we couldn't reach, and that helped a little bit. But then later on, we just, like I said, I didn't plan well with staff and how long this would take, so we didn't really have the time or resources to email all of the women who didn't respond. But we'll certainly build that into the next proposal. Okay, so this map is a little outdated, but it does give a sense of where these women are coming from and how broad the range is. So the Army of Women are coded in pink, and the other sources I talked about are the blue ones. You can see we've got a nice set in Southern California there, Texas, some in Alabama, Florida, but then some up here in the Northeast where we are. Okay, so here is the basic summary of comparing each of these sources. So the first one here is participate in previous research. So these were those epidemiologic studies I talked about. So we had about 218 women who we contacted. A lot of them were not eligible because their family member had died, or they didn't have an eligible relative, didn't have a female relative at all. And then we had 80% who completed the study. So what I'm showing here below is the percent of eligible women who completed the study. So we had a pretty high yield for this method of recruitment, like I said, because these women had participated in before and have had a higher level of motivation. So then I sort of lumped all these Komen races, Sisters Network events, and other things into this group, recruitment at community events. You can see our yield was lower because I think a lot of times we talk to people and they say, oh yeah, I'm interested, maybe to get us to go away, or maybe get our little handouts that we'd give out at these meetings. But then when it came down to it, we had trouble contacting them, or they weren't eligible. And then for the Army of Women, you can see that we have 56% of those women who completed the study who were eligible. So that is a pretty high yield and almost right on par with those who have participated in other studies. So I think that's pretty remarkable. And then we have the National Witness Project. So this is our primary source of recruitment. And this came in the latter half of our recruitment because this is when we started getting on the ground and traveling to sites and recruiting women in person, hosting these spit parties where we have a big event, have a dinner for the women, have an educational component where we talked more in detail and they got to see us and get to know us, so we're not just some phone call phone number they don't recognize, and that helped us a lot. That's how we got such a high yield there, but that costs a lot of money for all that travel and all that time. So the higher yield is great, but like I said, the higher cost comes with it. And when you think about the cost of the Army of Women, there's just no comparison. I mean, some of our flights were approaching $1,000 if we wanted to get in and get out and get back to work, and so we did a lot of weekend travel to get to events and to try to reach women. We had one little stint in a support support group. We had a friend who was part of the National Witness Project in New York City. She was in Brooklyn. And she said, well, I go to this support group. Why don't I take your things to it and talk to the women? So, of course, we had a nice high yield there, but it's a small sample size. But this is something I think we want to explore more. These women were highly motivated to participate. So we'll explore that another time. Okay, yeah, so like Leah said, the Army of Women helped us to get 34% of our overall study sample, which is a very nice chunk. Okay, and I already said that. Okay, so conclusions here. So we had to take multiple, we had to collaborate with lots of people. We had to vary our recruitment methods to reach our goals. So one method didn't work, but all of them together got us where we need to be. And I would also say that the Army of Women is very efficient and a money-saving method for recruitment. So we're very, very thankful for this resource. Leah and Dr. Love have been wonderful to work with. So it's just, this is one of the most least stressful recruitment methods that I had, which is nice. Okay, so then yeah, yay! So acknowledgments, I have a huge team here at the University of Buffalo who helped to recruit and advise. The Roswell Park Cancer Institute, like I said, Dr. Debbie Irwin is one of my cohorts in crime here. Dee Johnson is from the National Witness Project. She is housed here at Roswell Park. Laura Suchiston helps to mentor. And then the Women's Circle of Health Study. This is one of the big epidemiologic studies in New Jersey and New York City that has recruited a large sample of African American women. And of course, Veronica and her family. Without them, we wouldn't be doing any of this. The study participants, the National Witness Project again, and the Army of Women, and then funding from Susan G. Komen. So I will end with that and take some questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Heather. So we're open to questions. If you have any, please go ahead and type them in. And again, we will be recording. We are recording now. We'll be posting this on our website later on. You can go through the slides again, and then you can also email any additional questions, and you can also share it with your colleagues. We don't have any questions right now, but I guess, Heather, in terms of if you had advice to give to the researchers who are thinking about using the Army of Women, I know you talked about a little bit about making sure you have the appropriate staff and to handle all the work. So do you have any advice to give to the researchers?
Let me see. So we did have to plan for who would make those phone calls and who would help to follow them up because, well, so African Americans may be more difficult to reach than women who aren't African American. So maybe that was part of why we had to spend more effort and had a harder time tracking them down, had to make more calls basically. So I would definitely plan to have a lot of effort. And so we have sometimes graduate students helped here, and they're usually cheap labor. So, but they learned a lot from the experience. Yeah.
That's great. We do have a question. So and I don't know if you can answer this or not, so I'll just toss it out to you. But in the beginning, African American women have triple negative breast cancer. So do you know what these markers are?
You mean the triple negative or ERP or HER2? So is that, I'm not sure what the question is.
I guess I'm not quite sure what the question is either. If you'd like to clarify your question, that'd be great. But I think, like Heather said, if you're looking for triple negative, it's oh, she got it. That's the question.
Oh, good. Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. Great.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so what we're starting to do right now is, of our 127 families, try to put them into groups where, you know, these groups are very interesting because they have a lower age of onset, or this other group is interesting because they have they're all triple negative, or there are a certain group of families that are just loaded with lots of different cancer types. So those might be interesting to study on their own. Maybe there's an underlying gene that is just the strong cancer gene that is segregating there.
Yeah. Okay. Alrighty, are there any other questions from our audience members today? Feel free to type them in. You can ask questions about the Army of Women, about the application process, or if you have any questions for Heather about her study or any questions firsthand from a PI who recruited via the Army of Women. I know that a lot of researchers coming in to use the Army of Women are a little worried that they may not get the women they need, and they're pleasantly surprised when they find out they can. And I think, too, in terms of the return rate on those saliva samples, it seemed like you got the saliva samples back, you know, after you sent out the kits.
Yes. Yeah, so we just had a portion of women who it got buried on their pile of mail. Some of them got thrown away, so we mailed another. We had some of them spill. So on the kits we used, you have to have one kit on it that has the fluid that preserves it. When you close it, the fluid pops out and mixes with your saliva. Then you have to take that tube off, take the top off, and replace it with a smaller cap. And that was a little confusing for some women. So sometimes they spilled. And so we had to try to get another one, and then we had a few samples where once we looked at how much DNA was in it, there was very little DNA. So we took another few months to do another mailing to say, okay, we didn't have a good collection. Can you send us another one? And if you do, I'll give you $25 to try, because if I lose one woman, I lose that whole family.
Definitely.
Yeah. So
okay. I think those are really great tips, and I think those are it's great advice to researchers if they're thinking about doing these mailed kits, because we definitely see a really great response when we're recruiting for these studies on a national level, because if the women can be anywhere in the U.S., obviously that opens it up to a large proportion of our membership. And so I think it's a really great way to expand on your, like you showed the map on where everybody was living. So I think it's a really great way to expand the diversity of the members of the study.
Yes, yes, I couldn't be happier with the response we've had. And I will definitely include this on every grant I write.
Well, we are very happy to hear that. All right, I'll put one more call out for questions, and if there's no additional questions, which it doesn't seem like there is, I'll just wait for another few seconds. But again, you have my contact information on the slide. You have a way to register for the Army of Women, and we're happy to answer any questions you have. And if you have any follow-up questions for Heather, please feel free to email me, and I'll pass those along to her. So thank you so much, Heather, for joining us today. It was a really great presentation. I think it really shows, how the Army of Women can help, with different varieties of recruitment methods that you're using, and that we can be one of those methods.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Well, oh, hold on. It looks like we may have a question. Just one second. Now I've got to, I'm undocking it. Oh, hold on. Now I'm the presenter. So we do have a question for you, Heather. Are you looking at other genes as well as BRCA?
Yes, so we're not studying BRCA at all. What we're doing is we've restricted our study to women who, if they were tested negative. But we're trying to find new genes just like those where there are strong risk factors in those families that we can hopefully someday use to predict, just like they do for BRCA. If you've got a strong family history, maybe it's due to one gene, but with breast cancer is a complicated disease. There may be lots of genes, not just one. So we realize that.
Great. All right. Are there any additional questions? How are you doing the genome-wide analysis?
Oh, good question. Okay, so what we've done is I've done one of the Affymetrix axiom arrays, which is we're going to get over 1 million SNPs, and so that genotyping is finished. Now I have what we're going to do is pick which SNPs we want to use to analyze, and then just run linkage analysis one chromosome at a time, and look for these differences in allele sharing, where there's stronger sharing between the affected relative pairs and weaker sharing between the discordant pairs. So that suggests that the affecteds are all sharing one or more other regions, and that kind of hones us in to say, okay, to take a closer look, okay, what genes are in this region? Do we know anything about them? Are they associated with breast cancer at all? Are they associated with other cancers? What's the function of that gene? So yeah, these data sets are so large, and it's going to take us several months. So probably by October, we should have our nice, keynote paper that documents our first pass of this data.
That's great. That's great. All right, are there any additional questions? We still have about 5 minutes to go, so if you do have any questions, please feel free to type them in. Okay. I don't see any new questions, so I'm going to go ahead and say thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We will be having another webinar later on in the next couple months, so we'll definitely let you know about that one. And in the meantime, please feel free to contact me. Here's my contact information again, and I hopefully look forward to working with some of you in the future. So thank you again, Heather.
Thank you. Take care, Leah.
Have a good day.